Welcome to a Kafka Roundtable Talk. I'm here with... Sorry, Nahid?
Nahid, yeah.
Okay, we'll do it together. Sure. Welcome to a Kafka Roundtable Talk. I'm here with Nahid from HelloFresh and Sion from OSO.
Sion from OSO. So yeah, nice to see you all.
So we only have two microphones, so we're gonna have to pass it between me and Sion a little bit, and Nahid is at least gonna speak freely. So bear with us here. We don't really have an agenda per se. We just thought we would make a fireside chat and just chat about all things Kafka. I'm sure we can talk a lot. I think so. So how do I get us started? I don't know. Nahid, tell us, how do you use Kafka at HelloFresh?
Okay, so Kafka in HelloFresh is how can I project? Like it's become it started 10 years back, but when we moved from monolith to microservice, and the main purpose was more like async communication at the beginning, how each service will propagate data from each other. And we also have like so many database. We do CDC with Rebesium, do real-time changes. And in Kafka, we do the real-time processing with Kafka Stream. Mostly, recently we also start using the Flink. But this is like starting from the microservice, database, propagated through Kafka, and we have real-time streaming. And the next part is basically the syncing Kafka topic to S3 bucket. And from the S3 bucket, our data analyst team do all the SQL query and magic and make sense of the data and create the dashboard that is basically used by the executives and for reporting and all of these things. So it's like a journey from the beginning, from backend to data analyst. In general, this is how it looked like, but in middle, Kafka, we have definitely other tool like RabbitMQ and so many other stuff. I will go one by one. I don't want to put everything together at this moment.
Maybe list them out. I don't know. How do you use RabbitMQ compared to Kafka? Because Kafka also is going to have queues now,
yeah,
right?
this is also a interesting thing. So we have some DC that we call like data center, which basically we have some IoT, and this IoT device need more lower latency than Kafka. The RabbitMQ is really good in that sense. Plus, even though, like I said, we came from the monolith to microservice. So at the beginning, RabbitMQ was easy to adapt when your company is really small, and Q is very well-known concept, right? So it's very easy to start, but slowly when we grew also a lot, our requirement changes, our architecture changes. At some point, Kafka was introduced, but definitely RabbitMQ is still there for some use case that really makes sense, and so many things slowly move to Kafka along the time.
I'd like to ask a bit more about your Kafka cluster. So do you have one cluster? Do you have a monolith cluster, or do you have a number of smaller clusters, or do you have one team managing the Kafka cluster, or how does the platform actually set up in HelloFresh?
Okay, so we have till now a monolith cluster that serve fine totally. So we have definitely the environment like staging and live. So on purpose, staging and live, we make all the configuration at least same. So not to make people surprised. Like for example, I deploy something staging, and later I move it to live, and I become surprised because your partition is not same, or some other settings may not be matched with staging and the live, but the resource is not the same. Live cluster definitely have lot of resources. Staging is not that powerful, but in any type of configuration, partition, and all of these things, schemas remain always sync. We have a pipeline, which is definitely GitOps style pipeline, that create all of the resources in the Kafka, like Kafka topics, Avro or proto schema, and all of these things. Also, we do something very interesting, which is we do also schema management from that repository. This schema is validated through the CI. That means proto you know, like Avro is easy to push in schema registry, but Proto you need to convert to different languages like Golang, PHP, or Java, right? For serialized and deserialized purpose. So this repository basically convert the protobuf to this many different languages code, so that people can take this library from Artifactory and use them in all the microservice. And this is not only for, by the way, Kafka. This is also for the gRPC communication, so that your contract doesn't break. So this is the one of the nice work I love. That HelloFresh is basically doing very good in that.
So the applications basically register in that central repository, and then the CI/CD will then push that to the schema registry, or they pull.
Not application. I would say every domain or every single microservice owner is basically define a topic with a schema, and this schema, when you commit or change, the CI/CD do all the linting, all the validation. And before it push to the actual Kafka schema registry, you see all the breaking changes and everything. By this way, you can basically protect your any breaking changes before it goes to main infrastructure. That's the beauty here.
And I wanted to ask, you said protobuf, right?
Yes.
They don't sell Kafka anymore, Buff, but Buff seems like a perfect fit for that. They also saw the schema registry, they were protobuf native, and they saw the protobuf native Kafka. And I think from that point of view, we can segue to vendors and ask you, I understand you landed on Ivan right now as a vendor. How was that search like of finding vendors? Did you consider a lot of different providers? Can you tell me more about that whole story?
I mean, okay, so our scale is, we have in monolith cluster almost 4,000 topics, and we see this is in two way. Internally, we divide it into two big chunk of thing. One is private topics, another is public topics. What I mean by this is, for example, you are in a single domain, you are working, and you want to be more fragile. Like you can break your schema, you can change your code, you can commit. The other side of the organization is not going to be impacted by this change. But if you make it public, you have to have a strict data contract, which is ensured by the protobuf. For example, you can add field, but you cannot remove a field that break the things, right? So in this way, we try to control the breaking change and everything. But the vendor and other things, I would say, Even is doing great. I'm not, because of this is event, I'm not saying for that thing, not really. I mean, we need a Kafka cluster, and that's the hosting side is solved. You don't need like some other what I can say, value-added service from the provider. If it is, we have, it's fine. But because at the beginning, I mean, I was not there when the event was chosen. So over the time, we kind of made up all of these tooling around the Kafka, and we somehow protect our customer. I'm from the platform team. Our customer is our internal developer team, right? So somehow we managed to give them all they need at this moment. I mean, all they need, I mean, all the breaking change, all the ACLs. For example, if you break this with public and private, you can also now implement the Kafka quota based on that programmatically. And we have a strict naming convention. Naming convention is not just a custom. It become like the very hard rule people need to maintain. For example, one of the challenges in our company is we see frequent reorg, like someone move this team to that team, and ownership is the one of the important thing. Like if you cannot find like who is own this Kafka topic, this is very difficult on-call management and all everywhere, right? So we start the Kafka topic. Those are the private topic with a Git prefix. So with a GitHub repository name as a prefix. That means you can now easily go your GitHub automation and find the who is the owner of this. So I don't sadly I cannot present it here. So if I can show the slide, it will be very great. But this is how we have the ownership from the beginning. This from the GitHub repository, and we can also programmatically define all the ACLs, all the quotas, and all of these things. And even though people switch from team to team, it's very rare they rename their Git repository, right? Your code remains same. So this is how you can ensure like who is the owner, and we have APIs to call and find out the ownership.
That's a really smart way. Sean, you do Kafka consulting, right? Can you tell us a little bit what you've seen in terms of how people manage their topics, how they name them, and how they do like governance managing, like just like how?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting actually. It's quite a good insight. When you're a consultant, you actually see a lot of good and bad. So you've only just seen your cluster, right? I've probably seen hundreds of different clients and hundreds of different clusters. What's interesting is how people like basically reinvent the wheel in a lot of the same places, and it looks the same, but under the hood it's quite different. So using like a standard topic name is really common, where you'll have a tenant ID. So the topic will be like tenant ID, public, private, and then the application ID, and then that's tied back to some domain model. But also, I think a lot of people, it depends on your Kafka maturity. So some teams will just deploy a cluster and just spin it up, and then the people in the business will see the value of it, and then they'll start adopting that kind of half-baked naming strategy, or they'll start using the cluster that was spun up really quickly. So it's not really a central platform, it's just a team which is kind of spun Kafka up, and now it's grown organically. And that's kind of the real hard times when you have to try and come in and almost re-engineer the cluster and structure it and put more guardrails in place, because one team requirements does not fit the whole organization. And also that kind of breaks down when there's different kind of classifications of different workloads. So you might have connectors which are very noisy, or Flink workloads which are very noisy, and then you also have then streaming applications or kind of mission critical one partition event sensitive topics, where they kind of they really need to have kind of like a tier 1 workload, and can't be affected by the tenants around them. So it's quite interesting how you can structure it. But I think part of the learnings that companies make is like what worked today might not work in a year's time, and having the confidence to go to your org and your stakeholders and say, hey, look, our cluster is not fit for purpose now. It was then, but we need to re-engineer it, or we need to redeploy it, or we need to recreate a new one, and have the confidence to go and do that. It's a really like big thing that people should really lean into and do.
Yeah, without breaking it too, and ensuring uptime.
So I have a question for you. Like, what do you see after people having data in Kafka? Like, what they do with this data? One is like stream processing. Another is, do you see people are doing a lot of like syncing to the S3 bucket, and what happened after that?
Yeah, so it depends on really depends on the sector really. So finance, a lot of finance is like event sourcing. So they will take a lot of external systems and they'll use it as a central source of truth. So they'll have like Bloomberg, or they'll have different kind of price tickers, and they'll use the ingestion, Kafka Connect, or streaming into Kafka as like the central nervous system. Kind of other, maybe like we work with a logistics company or an automotive company. They use it from IoT. So it's more of an infrequent way of transporting data. So they have lots of different sources, IoT, MQTT, all these different protocols, and they use Kafka as like basically the API layer into their platforms. So they know that all of their downstream services can consume from Kafka, but they might have a load of different protocols which are coming in to their kind of data pipeline. So it really does depend on the sector, to be honest. Trying to think of some other examples. We don't really see that many true streaming workloads. There's quite a few, but like they're not that popular, to be honest. So yeah.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Also, like, how do you see like anyone using any proxy before serving from the Kafka, like for governance, for some naming policy enforcement? Because one of the challenges having a proxy before Kafka is high availability and everything. Kafka is very high available because all the broker and everything, if something goes down, it somehow reheal itself, right? So do you see any good example of using a proxy before Kafka? And for
I'm a bit old
governance
school.
or guardrail?
I'm a bit old school in the sense that if you're putting something in front of Kafka, that's your central point of failure, right? So it's like you've got to keep that highly available. Whatever kind of proxy tool you use, that needs to be as available as the brokers, because essentially that's the control plane that you're going into. I firmly believe it's like if you can kind of structure the security and guardrails from an ACL or a kind of an RBAC perspective, you're probably better off just using the broker endpoints than you are using some proxy. But it depends on the use case, really.
But also, I heard this pushback from Conductor once, which I think makes sense. Is would you say that Nginx is a single point of failure? Like any good proxy is made to be stateless. I wouldn't say Nginx is a single point of failure per se.
I get your point, but the way I see it is in the long run. Like you can probably just write a proxy on top of Kafka. What happened like after 1 year, 2 years? Who will going to maintain? Who will going to keep going with the same pace of the Kafka? Because Kafka has a big community and everything, right? So as an enterprise, if we choose something like this, we have to make sure that what we put there and what will be the sustainability on the long run, right? So this is the one of the fear I see. So many things I want to implement on top of Kafka by introducing a proxy layer or something, but I'm really afraid that who will going to maintain this for down the line, like 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year?
I think it's a real risk, to be honest. Like you're introducing more kind of like, well, first vendor locking, and secondly, like, you know, as you rightly said, you're now reliant on that vendor as your central point of entry into your Kafka ecosystem. If you're running open source Kafka, you can move anywhere, right? There's a bunch of tooling, kind of to support the migration. But if you're using Conductor, or if you're using there's Croxylicious, I think there is, you're kind of like, you're relying on those projects and platforms to be around, and you're at the mercy of what their pricing is then, right? I'm not sure. It depends on the use cases of what you're trying to do and why you're trying to introduce the proxy in the first place. But I wouldn't do it as, I would almost do the exercise as like, you could maybe treat it as, figure out what the teams want to use the proxy for, rather than just kind of treating it as a central platform decision. Go and speak to the application teams and see what their use cases are to see if it warrants using a proxy, because there are advantages of using it. It's just you've got to kind of work off those trade-offs. We done? I'm happy to leave it there, unless you have any more questions.
Let me think.
Yeah. It's just freestyle.
I agree. It's true with the proxy thing that, even if it's not a single point of failure, you have this not governance, but like maintainability point of failure, where you needed to have at least an active enough community compared to Kafka, because as your vendor can go bust. You can migrate to another open source Kafka, but if the one guy maintaining your proxy goes bust, or he just gets bored and starts vibe coding something else, then yeah, who's gonna continue that?
Okay, I have another question for both of you. Like, Kafka recently introduced the queue also. That is one thing. Another thing is, do you see also Kafka is using with other protocol? Like, it will be great if we have Kafka with RabbitMQ, like MQTT protocol or some other protocol. I see some companies, some startup is trying to have some other layer on top of Kafka. Or for example, Pulsar has two protocol. Like you can talk with MQTT as well as Kafka protocol itself. Like, how do you see this? Kafka should be Kafka, or this protocol is also fine?
I've personally thought about the idea of a multi-protocol proxy, which I think is an idea that can work. Where imagine, I don't know about Kafka per se, it's a separate topic, but just the idea of the product. Imagine we have this today. Imagine a proxy in front of Kafka that speaks Kinesis, PubSub, Kafka, RabbitMQ, whatever else. Obviously, it's not going to be able, and uses Kafka as a backend. It's probably not going to be able to implement the full protocol coverage, but surely it can probably implement 80% of the useful cases, or 80% of the most simple. Because at the end of the day, in Kinesis you save a message, you read a message. In PubSub you save a message, read a message. I think I'm more interested in that idea. I don't think Kafka as a project will ever adopt this, because the community doesn't even want to support S3 as an official API. It's all through plugins that are part of some other open source project. So that's what I think.
I've got, I mean, my take on this is, so we're kind of vendor agnostic, and I think one thing that we've developed recently is a Kafka backup tool, or it can be used as a migration, but it actually opened up a bigger question of like, we used to get a lot of questions like, can I back my Kafka cluster up? And we always used to say no, to be honest, because it was like, it's distributed by nature, right? So you should build in resiliency to your cluster. But actually it's become more important that companies don't want vendor lock-in, and they also don't, if they're using cloud services, they want to be an ability to, or need the ability to be able to spin up their data and their kind of event workloads in other vendors, to de-risk from one vendor. So the project we open source, the Kafka backup, it forces you to go through the process of, I mean, the backup is one thing, but actually the restore is the really critical thing, and the restore is the point that proves that you can, basically move from one cluster to another cluster, and using a repeatable framework that can get you to evidence-based restores is a really kind of tricky thing. And if you can do that, then I think you're not always kind of like stuck in one, not stuck on one vendor, but also you have the confidence that the workloads you do have can be migrated or changed in the future, because you have that basically that kind of that backup is outside of the cluster. It's in S3 or it's in local storage or something.
Okay, get back to the multi-region setup. Like you start with that question. Like, do you have a monolith cluster or multiple cluster? For example, if your requirement is you have EU zone, there is some custom some setup. Maybe US, you have another setup, right? So at some point, the latency become an issue with having two things. Like if you sync everything to one global cluster, someone is suffering, right?
Yeah.
So, but the problem is the moment you have the multi-cluster, now how do you join these multi-cluster topics? Maybe someone want to make some data make out of it. You need both cluster data. So how do you see the overall scenario
So
here?
you can use placement groups, right? So if you use Confluent, they'll use the placement groups, which you can basically coordinate it to different regions. So you can have like named clusters and put that placement group in that region. So you can kind of localize the data to the active. In open source Kafka, then you can obviously do the same kind of like in assignment groups, which isn't as good as Confluent, to be honest. But you're always going to have a trade-off when you have like active. Like you've got a trade-off between the consumers that are having to go to the other region to kind of read the replica or the leader, whichever is in context. So.
Do you see this a lot, or?
No, it is very rare that companies, and we don't really advise that you should run active unless you're really in control of the hardware. If you're using cloud-based infrastructure, like you're at the mercy of the provider. They will say a certain latency, but actually it turns out there could be any number of things happening under the hood. So the only time we ever see active is when it's finance and it's normally trading workloads, and they have control of the data center. So they own the hardware, they own the data center, and they control the latency, and it's a very fixed contract between the two locations.
Yeah, you mentioned the Confluent. I know they make it a bit more easier, but what about the other people? Like people are using MSK or like for the Aven. Do you see the Mirror Maker people are using a lot? Because I know the Mirror Maker is a bit not as Confluent cluster linking.
No, it's
right?
not as mature as Confluent Replicator. Mirror Maker 2 is what people use. It depends on your workloads, really. If you are you trying to architect for resiliency, or are you trying to architect for availability? It depends on your kind of use cases and what your RPO and RTO is. So it really does depend. But we don't see active, and we don't see replication kind of very often, as in active.
What about disaster recovery scenario? So if you have a monolith cluster, there will be always remain a risk of having what if my cluster have an issue, if going down, how can I scale it? How can I have at least some mental peace that if something happen, I have a disaster recovery cluster. So do you see this a lot, or have any suggestions?
So the solution is the Kafka backup, right? So you have a backup which is kind of stored in S3. It's idempotent, so it can't be altered, and then you can basically just restore from that. So you can spin up a new cluster and migrate the data from S3 into the new cluster.
But is it really practically possible?
No, it's not impossible. I don't know. We might have to stop. Yeah, sorry.
I think we're gonna cut it preemptively. As you can see, the food is coming out, and that part is gonna get full. We can potentially continue this online at some point, have a part 2. Thank you so much for bearing with us at this impromptu podcast, fireside chat / talk. And yeah, thanks for watching.